Hey guys, thanks for coming back to watch day 2 of Miss Williams' morning meetings. I'm sure you all heard the news that school has now been closed through May 15th. So we will see in the coming days and weeks what that's going to look like, but we will continue on. On this day in history, one of the world's worst oil spills occurs when the Exxon Valdez crashes. This happened on U.S. soil. It was in the Prince William Sound in southern Alaska. There was an estimated 11 million gallons of oil spilled into the water. Attempts to contain the massive spill were unsuccessful, and wind and currents spread the oil more than 100 miles from its source. And there you can see the tanker and just all the oil in the water. It eventually polluted more than 700 miles of coastline. Hundreds of thousands of birds and animals were badly affected by this environmental disaster. And here's a couple images of some of the animals with the oil on them. So it was later discovered that the captain, Joseph Hazelwood, allowed an uncertified officer to steer the ship, and they hit a reef, which obviously caused the oil to spill out. Exxon in 1991 agreed under environmental agencies to pay out $100 million and provide $1 billion over a 10-year period to help clean up the water and obviously help with animals. However, later they rejected the agreement and they ended up paying less than 4% of that. They only paid $25 million. So that's kind of sad, that poor little otter. So that happened in 1989 on this day in history, the Exxon Valdez spill. All right, and on to our featured lady. I contemplated whether or not I should share information about Anne Frank with you because it's kind of a sad story, but I thought given our current situation, no way comparing the two. Hers was way worse. I thought that, thinking about our life in quarantine, it kind of puts in perspective what she had to deal with on top of other fears. So I thought, hey, we'll do Anne Frank. Let me flip back and go to the first image of her. So she was born in Frankfurt, Germany on June 12, 1929. Her father was a businessman. His name was Otto, and her mother was a stay-at-home mom who took care of Anne and her older sister. She was very outgoing, and she actually got into a lot of trouble. She was a lot like her father, who would tell the girls stories and play games with them, while Margot was more of an introvert and kind of shy. Growing up, she had lots of friends. Her family was Jewish and followed some of the Jewish holidays and customs, and liked to read and dreamed of being a writer someday. So this was during the time of the Nazi takeover. So in 1933, Adolf Hitler became the leader of Germany. He was not a fan of Jewish people, and many began to flee Germany because they were afraid of what he would possibly do. So Otto decided to do this as well. In 1934, he moved his family to the city of Amsterdam in the Netherlands. She was only 4 years old at the time, and before long she made new friends. She could speak the language Dutch and was going to school, and her family felt safe again. So here's a map of her move from Germany to Amsterdam. Then World War II breaks out when in 1939 Germany invaded Poland. Germany had already taken over Austria and Czechoslovakia, and they began to question, would they invade the Netherlands too? So their father considered moving them again, but they stayed. And then on May 10th, 1940, Germany invades the Netherlands. The Franks did not have time to escape. The Jews had to begin to register with Germans. They weren't allowed to own businesses, have jobs, go to the movies, or even sit on benches at the park. Otto Frank had to turn his business over to some of his non-Jewish friends, and in the midst of all this, they tried to go on as normal. Anne had her 13th birthday, and one of her presents was a red journal, which is now how we know her story, and the book that was published, The Diary of Anne Frank, is because she got this red journal for her birthday. So things just kept getting worse. The Germans began to require all Jewish people to wear a yellow star on their clothing. Then one day the order came that her sister Margot was going to have to go to a labor camp. Otto was not going to let that happen. So he and Edith had been preparing a place for the family to hide if they needed to. The girls were told to pack what they could. They had to wear all of their clothes in layers because a suitcase would look suspicious. And then they went to their hiding place. And here's a picture of the outside of their hiding place. So Otto had prepared a secret hideout next to his place of work. The door was hidden behind some bookshelves. And this is what it looked like when it was closed. And when you opened it, it was like a hidden doorway. The hideout was small. The first floor had a bathroom and a small kitchen. The second floor had 2 rooms, one for Anne and Margot, and the other for her parents. There was also an attic where they were able to store food, and if somebody kind of needed some time alone, that's where they would go. She began writing in her diary that she named Kitty after a friend of hers. Each entry began, "Dear Kitty." She wrote about all kinds of things. She didn't think others would be reading it one day. She wrote about her feelings, books she read, and the people around her. From Anne's diary, we found out what life must have been like in hiding. The Franks had to be careful not to get caught by the Germans. They covered all the windows with curtains. During the day, they had to be super quiet. They whispered when they talked, and they went barefoot so they would walk softly. And then at night, when the people working in the businesses below went home, they could relax a little bit and be a little less careful. Soon, more people moved into their hiding place with the Franks because these people were Jews and needed to escape as well. So the Franks offered them a place to stay. One family were the Van Pels. They had a 15-year-old boy named Peter. So now the space began to get really cramped. And then Mr. Pfeiffer moved in, and he ended up rooming with the girls. He ended up rooming with Anne, and Margot moved to her parents' room. So life went on like this for nearly 2 years. They had to be quiet during the day. They lived in pretty much constant fear. And then they got news that the war was coming to an end, and it looked like the Germans were going to lose. So they started to have hope that they would soon be free. They started to kind of relax. But then on August 4th, 1944, Germans stormed into the Franks' hideout. They took everyone captive. The men and women were separated, and eventually the girls were separated and sent to a camp. Both Anne and her sister died while at this camp of the disease typhus in March of 1945, only a month before the Allied soldiers freed Germany and ended the war. So they almost made it till the end of the war, but I guess somebody tipped off where their hideout was, and so they stormed in and sent them all to the camps. After the war, the only family member who survived was her father, Otto Frank. He returned to Amsterdam, and he found his daughter's diary. Her diary was published in 1947 under the name The Secret Annex. Later, it was renamed Anne Frank, Diary of a Young Girl, and it became a very popular book read throughout the world, and it still is. So even though this is kind of a sad story, I think she is definitely an important woman from female, an important female from history, and she kind of shows that young kids can be brave, and unfortunately it didn't end up very well for her, but at some point you guys should try to read that book. So I hope you enjoyed it, and take care, and I will be back tomorrow. Have a good night, y'all.